Is Final Fantasy XIII still worth playing in 2023, 13 years after its launch? Yes. But there are some things that you need to know before hopping into your playthrough. Let me explain. Final Fantasy XIII is a great JRPG and a great Final Fantasy game in my opinion. The art direction, the visuals, the music. Oh my god, the music in this game is phenomenal by the way, and we'll get into it a little bit later. And the battle system are brilliant. However, the story's kinda wonky, some of the characters are very unlikable for the majority of the game. Along with this, the battle system doesn't open up until about 20 or 30 hours into the game, which is way too long. But let me go into each of these a little bit more in detail and explain the game that is Final Fantasy XIII. Alright, let's start off with something easy, the visuals. This game was launched in 2009 and still holds up to this day in terms of graphics. At times this game looks like a PS4 and Xbox One game on next-gen consoles. Absolutely gorgeous. The art design is also wonderful, which also plays a role into why it looks so good today. The enemies, the characters, and the world design are also very stunning. Most things in this game are a mix of futuristic cyberpunk tech and ancient tribal bestiary aesthetics. Try saying that 5 times fast. This game is visually tremendous. Let's talk about the music and the soundtrack. The soundtrack to this game is one of the greatest soundtracks to any video game ever. I legit listen to this music in my free time, especially when I'm working on a project or on a commute. All the Final Fantasy games have great soundtracks, but this one in particular I think is the best. So many of these tracks are absolute bangers and fit the situation that you're in so well. Here's some examples. With the occasional exception. But even then it's still charming in a way. Alright, let's talk about the gameplay. So the gameplay pretty much consists of jogging from point A to point B, opening treasure spheres, and battling of course. I'll talk about the battle system in just a second, but let's take a moment and talk about the traversal of this game. So this game gets a lot of criticism for being too linear. I don't inherently think that linearity in a game makes the game bad, especially since there are several games that are super linear, like Final Fantasy X, that are wonderful and don't get criticized for their linearity like this game does. So is it the linearity that everyone's upset about, or is it something else? Spoilers, it's definitely something else. I'll get into it a little bit later. Alright, now let's talk about the battle system. So this battle system is one of my favorite battle systems out of any RPG ever. And no, that's not sarcasm, I'm being serious. When the battle system opens up and you focus on the paradigm shifting and staggering, it becomes such a unique and interesting and engaging battle system. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. However, as I stated before, it does take about 20 hours or so for the battle system to open up, which is outrageous. So here's how the battle system works. You are only ever in control of one character at a time, and you have an ATB or active time battle gauge that fills up over time, rather quickly I might add. And once you select a command for the gauge on the ATB chain, your character will perform those commands. For most people, they will find that the ATB gauge fills up too quickly when trying to manually put in commands, which is an option by the way. So what they'll do is they'll just use the auto battle button, which automatically fills the gauge with the best or seemingly best choices for whatever paradigm your character is in. For me, this is absolutely the way to play the game. Putting any commands manually just sucks and is relatively inefficient. Yet the auto battle option is one of the main sources of criticism of this game. So is it auto battle or auto play? A lot of the narrative around this auto battle function of the battle system is that it's the best option for the battles, but this option essentially makes the gameplay itself. In a way, this is kinda true, especially in the first 10 hours or so. I'll explain this soon, I promise. Some critics might say, so what's the point of having an option to choose different types of attacks if the game's gonna give you a function to automatically pick the best ones with a single button? They may also say the battle system isn't fun because you're essentially just constantly pressing one button until the fight's over. Each of these statements have merit, but they're missing the big picture. The point of the battle system is not being able to individually pick each command all the time. They give you this option, so if you want to pick an individual command, you can. However, the point of the auto attack button is to focus on paradigm shifting and the staggering mechanics of the game. The real battle system. Paradigm shifts and staggering. Real meat and fun with the battle system is paradigm shifts and staggering. Paradigms are basically different versions of a roster of roles each character will have in battle. And in order to change a character's role, you have to perform a paradigm shift. Each paradigm has your party member in a specific role that provides some type of benefit towards the battle. Staggering is a mechanic that increases the amount of damage that you do to enemies, not only in the lead up to being staggering, but also once staggered, where the damage you do is immensely increased. This is done by building up a chain gauge. So ultimately, the goal of the battle system is to switch up these paradigms in an advantageous way, so that you build up the enemy's chain gauge while also keeping your party healthy and doing the most amount of damage once staggered. So how all exactly does this work? So in total there are 6 roles that you can customize for your personal paradigms, and these 6 roles are Commando, Ravager, Sentinel, Medic, Synergist, and Saboteur. I'll go over each role quickly. So the Commando role, probably the main role you're going to be using, and is utilized for doing the most standard damage and reducing how quickly the enemy chain gauge decreases. Again, the main goal is to get the enemy staggered by building up the chain gauge. Additionally, each type of enemy has unique chain gauge that has specific thresholds for staggering that increases and decreases at different rates. So while the Commando stops the chain gauge from depleting rapidly, the Ravager vastly increases the buildup of the chain gauge, but also causes the buildup to decrease rapidly as well. The Ravager is also essentially the magic role of this game, so it's also good for exploiting elemental weaknesses that enemies have. The Sentinel role is the quote-unquote tank, so they can take a lot of damage at a reduced rate in comparison to other roles, and they can provoke enemies to focus in on them. The role is good for protecting other party members while they do damage. The Medic is pretty self-explanatory. They heal and revive the party. The Synergist boosts attributes of the party so they can be more effective at their roles. And the Saboteur works to decrease the defense of the enemy so that you can do the most damage to the enemy. And the great thing about these roles is that you can personalize your own paradigms. There are about 56 different combinations that you can do. Thus, this makes the battle system really about setting up your favorite paradigms and then knowing when to shift to the appropriate paradigm to first stagger the enemies and then maximize your damage output while staying alive. So if the battle system is so great, like I say it is, why do so many people hate it? Let's talk about the real problem with the battle system. The real reason people hate the battle system is that it takes too damn long for it to finally open up. What do I mean by that? So in the first 10 hours or so of the game offers very little challenge in terms of battles, and there's really no difficulty settings either. So there's really no incentive to do any type of paradigm shifting, which is the real fun of the battle system. So basically through this time, you'll just be using auto battle and cakewalking through the first sections. During my first 10 hours of my playthrough, I found that if I had a Commando and 2 Ravagers, I pretty much didn't need to shift paradigms. During the next 10 hours, I did find myself doing more paradigm shifts, but it still was very limited. However, in the last 1/3 of the game fully switches to paradigm shifting, where the focus is on shifting, staggering, buffing, debuffing, and healing aspects of the battle system. And at that point, the game's a blast. Once you get past these first 20 hours or so, this battle system is honestly one of my favorites out of any JRPG. But the battle system isn't the only reason why people hate on this game. The narrow, empty road. Another large area of hate for this game is the extreme linearity and emptiness of the world. Let me tackle the linearity first. This game is super linear up to a certain point. Chapter 11. You can't really debate that. The map is like literally a straight line. And I know I brought this up earlier, but I just want to give a second and a little bit deeper dive into the subject. So there are story implications as to why the game is so linear, as basically the main characters are running from their fate, insinuating that there's only one direction to go, which is forward. But something also to consider is that this game was released back in 2009, so there might have been some technical limitations, and for as long as the game is, maybe they weren't able to make a more open style game. But I think it's the linearity along with the emptiness of the world that makes it feel as if you're just running in a barren straight line. I really feel like if there would have been more NPCs in towns, or any at all, to be honest. To be fair, there's a few, but there's not a whole lot, that you get to run through throughout your journey to Chapter 11, then the linearity of this game would not have been as much of a topic of hate as it stands today. However, the story and the characters, they need a lot of work. Summary of the story. No major spoilers. What's a l'Cie? Why are these people so angry and annoying? And what the f***'s going on? So the story is very hard to follow, especially if you're not attentive to it as it unfolds. Most Final Fantasy games are like this, where the story is complex, but 13's on a whole new level. However, everything can be understood if you pick up on terms as they're flinging them at you left and right, and make some intuitive conclusions about various different things and events. But it's really easy to get lost. There are data entries that give you more information about what's going on, and really if you're trying to understand the story, I would read them. When I played through the game the first time, and the second time. I read all of these data entries so I could understand what's going on in the story a little bit better. Even though I enjoyed doing this, and I think it made my experience better, I think this is bad design. I still didn't fully understand everything at the end either. I really wish the information in the data collections would have just been in the game and explained to the player instead of having to read about it. I say this, but I really like how some of the stories in games like Dark Souls was told through item descriptions and environmental storytelling. But I like it in those games because the premise of those games is to tell the story almost exclusively environmentally. Final Fantasy games always have a central cinematic storytelling approach, and I feel like this approach is integral to the Final Fantasy experience. And don't get me wrong, Final Fantasy 13 absolutely delivers in a cinematic approach, except it just doesn't make any sense, and it's not cohesive most of the time. I also feel like most people won't read the data entries and think that the story is completely nonsensical, which I honestly don't blame them for this opinion, especially when the characters are highly inconsistent with their moods and the plot development and the dialogue as a whole throughout the first 2/3 of the story. Speaking of characters, let's talk about the characters. By the end of the game, I really liked all the characters, except for Snow. He's just straight up unlikable. Honestly, unbearable too. But in the beginning of the game, I pretty much disliked all of the characters. I didn't start to like them until about the 2/3 mark of the game. As you can probably see, there's a pattern developing here. Everything gets better in the last third of the game. I will have to say though, Saz is a standout. He's really great throughout the whole game. So why did I not like everybody at the beginning? Well, it's because they're either dumb, rude, annoying, or all the above. But honestly, I think this might be intentional. The journey that you go through with these characters throughout the game allows these characters to massively develop and change from straight up intolerable people to relatable people. The characters express their grief at the torment that they are going through and bond over the course of the game in a journey to fulfill their pulse. I think that's kind of the point of the story. I think the characters are supposed to be intolerable at first, and then develop into better characters at the end. But honestly, Saz is pretty great throughout the whole game. And Snow just sucks pretty much the whole time. And Vanille's kind of annoying, and Hope's kind of whiny, and you know what, just forget this section. Oh my god, spoilers for Chapter 11. Chapter 11 spoilers. Not really, this game was launched in 2009, get over it. Alright, so Chapter 11 is a pretty big open world-ish chapter of the game where a lot of the in-game content is. This chapter is like a completely different game, and it's a blast. So no, the whole game's not linear. However, this chapter is the only part in the game where it's open world. But there is a lot to do in this chapter. If you take your time with Chapter 11 and venture back to it after the credits roll to find all the in-game secrets and bosses, and really challenge yourself with this game, I think you will see the magnificence of the battle system and what the devs were aiming for with the quality of this game. And by all means in this chapter, they absolutely hit it. And I think pretty much in the last third of the game, they hit it too. I just wish the whole game would have been like this. I'm glad they kind of figured out what the sequel, Final Fantasy 13 too. Also, if you want to see me do a video on that, you gotta leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, hit bell notifications, all that stuff. Conclusion. By no means is this a perfect game, or in the top 10 JRPGs of all time, or even the best Final Fantasy game. I think it's a great JRPG, and I think it's a great Final Fantasy game, but the best Final Fantasy game is Final Fantasy. It takes about 20 to 30 hours for this game to really take off, and in today's world, it's just hard to ask that of someone. And there are other glaring factors that will probably be off-putting for some, such as the linearity in the characters, and the limited battle system at the beginning of the game. With my playthrough, all of these issues did for sure hamper my experience. However, as the story and the characters and the battle systems developed throughout the hours of my playthrough, I really started to enjoy the journey, and in a way I kind of bonded with these characters and respect the story. And as a whole, I'd have to say the story's pretty good. If you have the time to see this game all the way through, I put a huge emphasis on that, and you like JRPGs and or you like Final Fantasy titles, then I think you will have an excellent experience with this game. Even though it takes several hours to develop, if you stick with it till the end, I think you'll look back at the overall experience as time well spent. Plus the ending is really, really good too, and definitely not retconned at all by the next game in the trilogy. There's so many things I could have talked about with this game that I might do in future videos. But if you like the video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification, and share. Basically, my future videos will be determined on how well this one does. So if you like it and you want to see more of it, let me know. Leave a comment and do all the previous stuff I said. Alright, until next time. Bye!